In this video, I'm going to upgrade this old fence to a better fence because this one just doesn't... It's not easy to use. I built this router table about 20 years ago. I was working off a set of plans that a friend of mine gave me. As you can see, I didn't really finish it, and the router lift is something that I just completed a few months ago. You can see on this fence, the in-feed and out-feed table are independently adjustable. I've always had problems with that, so that's part of the reason why I want to replace this one. I'm going to start by taking the old fence apart. I'm going to reuse some of this old hardware, especially the T-Track hardware. That was an upgrade that I added just a few months ago. The other pieces of hardware, I'll reuse them where I can. Some of them will end up in a drawer where I'll reuse them on another project in the future. I am going to reuse this dust collection port rather than having to buy another one. This one works just fine and it will fit the new fence design. Next, I'm going to pull out my largest router bit to make sure that I've got a large enough opening in the fence. This yellow raised panel bit is the largest bit in my collection, but unfortunately it's a little too big for the opening in my router plate, so I'm going to have to skip it and move to the next size down. That's completely fine because that bit actually kind of scares me. This green raised panel bit does have enough clearance in the router plate for me to be able to operate things safely, so I will use it for the measurements for the opening in the new fence. The fence that I'm going to build is a modified version of a fence that Jonathan Katz-Moses built in one of his videos where he had built a complete router table. I'll link to his video in the video description below. I'm going to use this piece of Baltic birch plywood that I had left over from other projects. I'm cutting this piece so that it is the same width as the current router tabletop. This piece is the right size so that I can get 3 pieces for the fence and 1 for the base. The fence pieces are 3 1/4 inches wide and the base will be 6 inches wide. Here I'm measuring to cut the opening in the base of the fence. The opening in the router plate measures to about 4 1/4 inches. So I'll go ahead and make this one about 4 1/2 just to give me a little extra clearance. I used my bandsaw to cut along the line that I drew with my compass. Now I'll mark the holes that I'm going to drill for my T-Track bolts. I'm setting my depth stop so that I can drill part of the way through just far enough for the brad to stick through the other side of the board. This way I don't blow all the way through the plywood and have some massive tear out on the back side. Then I'll flip the board over and drill the rest of the way through, giving me a clean hole all the way through the board. I'm putting my T-bolts and the knobs through the holes that I just drilled, and then I'll fasten it to the table. I'm stacking all my pieces together to see how the fence will look. I'm trying to figure out how to add the faces to this base, using hardware that I already have. I know that I don't have any bolts long enough to go through these 3 pieces of plywood, the faceplate, and long enough to get a bolt on the back of it for adjustments. What to do, what to do. Digging through my hardware drawer, I found some threaded inserts that I had left over from another project. These are Rockler 5/16 threaded inserts. I'll link to the product below. Now I need to find bolts and washers to match. Now that the shop is warm enough, I'm going to glue these fence pieces together and stick them in clamps. I'll spread the glue out using this silicone glue brush to get good even coverage between the pieces. These silicone glue brushes are amazing. I used to use horsehair brushes, but you could only get one use out of them and then have to throw them away. With these silicone brushes, you can let the glue dry and then peel it off later and use it again, and again, and again. I tried washing out the horsehair brushes so that I could use them again, but I could never quite get the glue out of them and they would just get stiff, and it just wasn't worth the time and the effort. I'm using a technique here that I picked up from Tamar at 3x3 Custom. I'm using a level to help keep this fence straight during the glue up. A couple of these boards have a slight bow to them. I'll link to her video in the description below. I'm flipping everything over to get clamps on the other side to make sure that I get even clamping pressure. With a sufficient amount of clamps, I'll take this and set it aside to let the glue set up. While I'm waiting on the glue to dry, I'm going to work on the adjustable faces for the fence. The faces were held onto the old fence using carriage bolts. I'm using hex head bolts to fasten it to this fence, and the hex heads are much larger than the carriage bolts, so I'm going to have to cut the adjustable slots deeper. I'm using a 3/4 inch straight bit to deepen these grooves. I'm adjusting the height of the bit using my setup blocks from eye gauging. These blocks are really nice for trying to get the perfect height. I set my 3/8 block across the table, and then I set the 1-2-3 block on top of it. I'll adjust the height of the bit until it pushes up the 1-2-3 block, and then I'll back it back down until it lays flat. Since I took the old fence apart, I don't have a fence to use since, I'm making a new fence. So I turned the base of this fence around so that I would have a straight edge. And then I'm setting a stop block at the beginning and the end, along with a featherboard, to keep the bit lined up with the previous cuts. Using the end block, I plunge the face into the bit and then push it up to the stop block, giving me the same cut that I had before, but now it's at the depth that I need to cover up the hex head bolts that I'm putting in. I'll repeat this process 3 more times to get all 4 holes in the 2 faces. After letting the glue set up for a couple hours, it's ready to pull out of the clamps. The glue is set up enough so that the boards won't come apart, but I can still scrape off the excess. I'm sanding off any of the glue that I couldn't get off with the scraper, while trying not to round off any edges and leave a smooth surface. Next, I'll mark the opening for the router bed in the fence, which I'll then cut on the bandsaw. I forgot to hit record when I cut it on the bandsaw, so voila, now I have an opening in my fence. I'm aligning the adjustable faces to measure and mark for where I need to drill for the new threaded inserts. I need the faces so that they will close up tight enough on my smallest bit, leaving as minimal gap as possible, but wide enough that I can still use the raised panel bit. Here I'll mark each of the holes with a pencil and check to make sure that I have the proper clearance before I drill any of the holes. I'm checking the markings with both the faces open and closed to make sure that I have the clearance that I need. With my holes marked, I'll use a punch to make a hole for the bits to follow whenever I drill for the inserts. Since the bolts that I'm using are longer than the inserts that I have, I'm going to drill 2 holes. The first hole will be the diameter of the insert at its narrowest part in between the threads, and I will drill it to a depth just deeper than the insert. I want to drive the insert just below the surface of the fence. With all 4 of the insert holes drilled, I switch to a smaller bit that is just larger than the bolts that I'm using. I will drill them to a depth that will go most of the way through the fence, but not all the way. To install the inlay, I'm using a long bolt and a nut. I'll run the nut most of the way up the threads of the bolt. I'll leave a little bit of room so I can get a wrench on the nut to be able to back it off the insert. I run the bolt all the way through the insert and snug it up against the nut. The extra threads at the bottom will go into that secondary hole. This will help to guide the insert straight into the hole instead of getting it cross-threaded. If the insert gets cross-threaded in the hole, then the slots in the fence faces will not line up with the holes on the fence. Then using an open-end wrench along with the socket, I can loosen the nut and then I can back the bolt out of the hole, leaving the insert behind. Now, like with most woodworking projects, I'm going to put everything together to see how it fits. And then I'll take it apart again. Checking to make sure that the faces will slide properly. And now that they do, then I'll take it apart. I'm aligning the fence with the base and then clamping it in place so that I can mark my holes. I'm marking the thickness of the fence so that I can stagger the screws and get the most stability out of the base, but not poke through, where I'm not supposed to. Now I can fasten the fence to the base using a countersink drill bit and screws. Here I'm measuring for the dust collection port. I'm reusing the old one from my old fence along with the wooden brackets that held it in place. With the fence assembled, I'll reinstall the T-track hardware and the adjustable fence faces. With all the pieces fully assembled, it is now time to install it on the router table and give it a shot. One of the nice features about the bolts for the fence faces is that it uses the same size socket as it does in my router lift. That way I can keep the same socket wrench handy for all the adjustments on my router table. To test it out, I'm going to use a 3/4 inch straight bit that I've already got in the router, and I'm going to use it to create a rabbet, or a rebate if you're British, rather than using a bearing guided rabbeting bit. And there you have it, an upgraded router table fence with adjustable faces and dust collection. If you like this video, be sure and hit like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.